IIM.
Artificial intelligence, what is that? It sure sounds like science fiction, but it's very much a part of our world today. But most of us lack understanding and a means to use AI to our advantage. Luckily though, Intel's Digital Readiness Program empowers everyone with skill sets, mindsets, and tool sets to use in an AI-fueled world, so you don't end up like me. The Intel AI for Youth program is an initiative that guides today's youth to an understanding of AI, how it is designed, and why it's important today. Intel's been working with the CBSE, Ministry of Education, and the Government of India to empower today's youth to build social impact solutions while demystifying what AI is. How do you take advantage of this? Purchase an Intel Core-powered PC and you get free access to 80 plus hours of immersive and hands-on training about AI. On completion of the program, along with a certificate, you get access to AI toolsets to try put what you learn to good use. Log on to futurebanawonderful.intel.com. Future Banao Wonderful by bringing home an Intel-powered PC.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, welcome to All Things Policy. We will be talking about a topic that affects 50% of our population. We will be discussing women's labor force participation rate. We have three women on the panel today. First is Priti Kataria. She is the CHRO of iCore business unit at Wipro. She leads an employee base of over 100,000 employees across 40 different countries with 37% gender diversity. She's also pursuing a Ph.D. in Organisational Behaviour and Human Resources from IIM Indore. And I'm your host, Sridhar Krishna. And the other guest on our show is Anurpriya Mohta. And Anu has been a friend and a class fellow, if you will, when we were doing a course at Takshashila. And Anu is a program manager and she worked with scaled operations. And she has over 5+ years of experience in the tech industry. And she's a passionate advocate for LGBTQ plus rights and with a background in marketing. And she's also doubles up as a freelance brand consultant for NGOs. Thank you very much for coming on our show, Anu. Aarushi, of course, all our other regular listeners know, and Aarushi is a student at Ashoka University and an extremely engaged and a vocal person and in fact, Aarushi joined this project primarily because she was interested in working on this particular subject, on how do we increase women's labor force participation rate and how that's so critical to improving the status of women, improving the economy in the country, and basically just doing what's right? So over to the three of you, I think we could have a better panel for this conversation on ideas behind why is India's labor participation rate so low for women? And what do you think we should do differently to make this go ahead? Over to you, Aarushi. You want to take it from here?
So I think the first thing I would like to talk about is to bore you a little bit with numbers. So according to the World Bank, India's labor force participation rate is at just around 48% for the year 2021. And if we break this down further into men's and women's labor force participation rate, men's labor force participation rate is at 75%, while women are at merely 21%. And now you might think this is a number comparable to our neighbors. I mean, we have similar economies, but it's really not. Nepal has a women's labor force participation rate at about 81%. Myanmar has it at about double our rate at 47%. China is rising at about 61%, and Bhutan is also at 60%. And both Pakistan and Afghanistan, though their numbers are questionable, have a single point advantage over us at 22%. So I think my question to both of you here would be, what do you think are some of the causes behind India's low labor force participation rate for women, and what can we do to improve the situation here?
Thanks, Aarushi. Also, thanks for having us, Sridhar and Aarushi. It's really cool to get this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about this subject that I'm super passionate about. I think the numbers that you just mentioned, Aarushi, they're very sobering, right? Knowing that our female labor force participation rate, which essentially means less than a third of the women who are above 15 in India are actually either employed or actively looking for a job, right? Knowing that our labor force participation rate is so low, especially compared to some of our neighbors like Bangladesh, who you exactly said are in similar economic situations, that should be alarming, right? And I've seen very often in economics, and I'd like to bore everyone with some theory now, I guess. There is a very common U-shaped hypothesis, right? Which essentially means that when a country is poor, for the lack of a better word, women work out of necessity, right? So they work more in the unprotected sector, and they tend to do jobs in, say, agriculture and stuff like that. And then as the country progresses, they fall out of the labor force. And then potentially as fertility rates increase, socio-cultural norms change towards labor force participation, etc., they find themselves employed, especially in service sector jobs. Now, this is a very common thesis or a common hypothesis. What I found interesting, though, is India is apparently an outlier in this. We are even further below where we should be as compared to in our economic sphere, I'd say, right? And this to me was a very shocking fact, and I wanted to know a little bit more about and addressing your question, what causes it? And to me, there are two major things, right, that we should look at. One is educational gaps, and two is gender pay gaps and the quality of jobs that women actually do, right? So I think job opportunities tend to improve vastly after women actually complete secondary school education. And in India, while the enrollment rates are high, I think the dropout rates are also high, right? I was looking up some stats, and about 40% of 15 to 18-year-old girls are out of school. 65% are engaged in housework. And as Sridhar told me in a recent conversation, 9.8 is the magic number. Women do 9.8 times more housework than men, right? Now, all of this is theory, stats, etc., but I think what it boils down to is the fact that women are engaged in the care economy. There are structural barriers. Their work is not really being counted. And the other piece is when they do want to be employed, I think the quality of jobs out there is not where it needs to be. And I can go on, but I'd love to hear Priti's view on this as well.
Hey, thanks, Anu, and thanks Sridhar and Aarushi for having us, in this chat. I've been listening to some of the podcasts in the past, so it's a pleasure to be part of this episode and join this conversation with all of you. So being in the industry and being part of this changing segment over the years, and doing some bit of reading because I've also coincidentally become a student recently, trying to pursue my Ph.D. So in that process, by interest and by design, and having also a very, very rigorous college student in the house, being forced to read a lot. So let me also do my part of, addition to the data which all of you have been throwing up and add to this conversation. So recently, I think I was doing a project on the returning moms in terms of the women who took a break. And like Sridhar was saying that, and things have changed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and some of the work, and this globally, I think getting acknowledged when the work was published even by ILO recently, that, the work done by women at home is like 4 hours, 25 minutes, unpaid care work, which doesn't get counted in the paid economy, vis-a-vis men spending 1 hour, 23 minutes. And Sridhar, this is for you to absorb. Maybe it is a little less, little more in India, but I'm sure this is the statistics globally, which is coming out. In terms of sheer care economy, which I think women by default are a very strong participant too. And somewhere this economy is being termed as reproductive economy, and some people and some researchers have actually gone ahead and called it a hypocrisy economy, wherein women are being allowed to work, but the expectation from them continues to be the same in terms of carrying on the responsibilities of childcare, elder care, as well as the other conscious scheduling of the day management at home.
I found it super interesting that comparing India to Brazil, for example, Brazil has very similar cultural nuances to compare to India, where it's relatively more patriarchal. But what is done differently there is the amount of investment in secondaries. And women have been able to find their way into tertiary education, which has been translated to formal employment. So what you were saying in terms of, women working in the informal sector, and not us not being able to incorporate them in the economy, I thought that was very relevant to say is that it's not just socio-cultural barriers. It's also the amount of investment we're putting into secondary school education and making sure that women are able to stay there, right? And yeah, I'd love to hear your views, especially on retention when women are coming back from maternal care, because also studies have shown that it's not very linear, right? And how your career has been impacted over the years and what has been your success story.
So I don't think I'll have any very philosophical answer here. I think I've taken each year, each day as it came. And it's, I think, somewhere about making a choice, and then living by it. So you made a choice of, first of all, studying, then, of course, taking up a job and acquiring a stage. And I think your choice, and I would also say a supporting ecosystem, which also believes in your career being equally important. So whether it's your spouse, whether it's your parents, whether it's your own child who's also moved around, so I have changed cities every 6 to 7 years. And I've had my daughter coming to office and sleeping in the office, won't be left alone in the guest house. She's come to office on weekends when I have done interviews. So I think this whole thing of, and then drawing certain boundaries. I think that's also equally important when you're trying to have a career, that it can't be skewed towards one side. So there's somewhere people know that, okay, fine. These days, she's not going to be traveling, or we both would not travel together, or certain meetings, which I will definitely attend, if it is impacting my daughter's classes or her parent-teacher interaction or her functions or her events. So you've balanced it out, and somewhere this whole sense of, okay, fine, if you've done well, you also want your child to do well. So you've not done tuitions, you take pride that your child should also not take tuition. So you make that effort to have those 2 hours with your child. So I think it's been a balancing act. It's been, I would say, raising your hand for some of the uncomfortable positions, organization believing in you. I think I would also say that. Somewhere I have never been forced to move to a location just because it was a head office job. So I've done it from the location I wanted to do it. And I think I've been enabled because you had a credibility built in, and people were willing to give that, that trust in you. And once that trust is there, then you become accountable for creating those outcomes. And to do those outcomes, I think you have your support system extended at home, extended professionally, and then take that ahead as a woman leader. And you looked up to people, I looked up to my mom, who probably started working after the age of 60, and she's been doing it for last 9-10 years. So each time I get stuck, I look up to her. I say, listen, if she can start working at 60 and she can, start from scratch, learning technology, learning and managing a team, which she's never done. She's always a homemaker. What's wrong with you? Similarly, I have conversations with my daughter at times when I get stuck, and it's like, you will pass this phase. So I think that's been, something of action which keeps you going. That's belief your family has in you. You don't want to let them down. And I think the organization with a value system wherein you feel safe, you feel you can speak your mind out, and then you are respected and you're valued. I think these 4-5 things go together. And somewhere in all of this, your career starts taking shape. And I think wherever there's a dissonance, I think you take a break, is what I believe strongly in. In terms of, Sridhar, your question, and I think Anu, your question of handling the women employees in the organization today, getting them back to work and aiming at some 90% retention. I think it's been customized, if you ask me, a lot today in terms of the respective context of the women, what they're going through. So you're not having one rule fits all or one policy fits all. So you've been flexible. The hybrid working way today, I think, is also letting people trust more, leverage technology more, and not really getting stuck with a mindset, that you have to be physically back. I mean, we are months away from getting back to normal. Some of these things are adding to it, because today, I think, the other problem we are facing is there are women who actually want to physically come back to work, but you don't have the creche operational. They want a break from home. And they're like, Priti, can we get back to the campus? So we are saying, no, you got to wait some more time. So we have that bucket of people also, who want to be back physically, but we are not ready yet. And maybe we will need answers for it.
Anyway, Aarushi, you were talking about the impact of all this, right? In terms of what happens when women's labor force participation is low. You want to pitch up, or do you have more things to say on the subject? I mean, what you've been hearing so far.
I think it's quite interesting the fact that, that even educated people, and we, think that at some point your privilege plays a role and you're able to break through these barriers, but the glass ceiling is as real as it gets. For the first time this year, Wharton announced an MBA class that had more women than men. It took so many years in history for a class to have 52% women. If you look at a field that I study in economics, there's less than about 1/3 of PhD recipients every year are women, which means that the glass ceiling is quite real. And it's not something that's getting better over the years. It's probably getting worse because these are systemic issues that aren't being solved. While we tend to think of these issues as something that, you require an overhaul in how we think, those are larger measures, but there are smaller measures also that we need to take in the interim to ensure that the larger changes are effective. Another thing that was quite interesting to me while I was reading is that women tend to be employed in lower productivity jobs. They aren't given the jobs that actually use all of their productivity and skills. So it was noted by the World Bank that, women occupy jobs that don't actually impact the economy itself because they're segregated into jobs that just don't provide or create that kind of output that adds value to the economy. And that's just gender segregation that occurs because of things like, women having to work at home, there being unequal access to information networks that could probably further them in their careers, unequal access to even credit for that matter. So one of the reasons why Bangladesh was able to really increase its women's labor force participation was that microfinancing was aimed at increasing, self-reliance for women. And those are measures that can be applied to India, but we aren't seeing those kind of changes. So I think those were points that I found really interesting while reading up for this podcast.
Yeah, I think something Priti said really struck a chord with me when she said, women need to kind of sometimes have that flexibility as well, right? And while we're talking about the formal sector and things like that, in my reading, I actually found that women tend to jump in and out of the workforce quite a bit as well. And that typically happens because there's this idea that the man is the breadwinner, and therefore women tend to take up jobs exactly as Aarushi said, which are maybe less productive or are in sync with or compatible with the other household chores and reproductive labor that they have to do, right? So what Priti said in terms of there needs to be this confluence or perfect synergy almost of everything coming together. I found it interesting that it applies just as much to the informal sector as well. And that definitely needs to be diversification of jobs, right? There definitely needs to be better quality of jobs out there.
Yeah, you want to talk about, Anu, the impact of this? Anu or Aarushi, either of you could take on this whole subject of what's the impact of a low female, labor force participation. What is its impact on our economy? I mean, does it really matter whether men are at work or women are at? What are your thoughts on? What's the data? What are your thoughts?
As the budding economist, and let Aarushi take this one, but I know I know a few facts that I saw, which is that apparently we, just by adding 10 percentage points to the female labor force participation, India could add $770 billion to the GDP by 2025. To me, that number is sobering. I'm like, the case should be obvious to everybody after they hear this number. And Aarushi, do you want to add something else?
I think that was a number that I was going to quote too about how important it is for women to be a part of the labor force. And I think, like we spoke about immigration, about why you need to do some things just because they're right. Increasing women's labor force participation is one of those ideas. It is a way to create and make the society we live in more equitable. It ensures that the development that occurs in economies is more sustainable. And it ensures that the world that is created for generations that come after us is more equal in ways than we see today. So I think more than just talking about it in terms of the kind of jobs it would create, the kind of growth it would result in, And when we look at articles by HBR which tell you that when women enter the workforce, wages are bound to rise, which means that your GDP is bound to rise when women enter the workforce. Or if you look at more specific research that was done about how women entrepreneurs tend to create more jobs than male entrepreneurs. And these are numbers that should be something that we think about when we say that we are having these glass ceilings or concrete roofs, that women are a substantial part. They're 50% of the population, and it's unfair on anyone's part to stop them from doing what they could achieve if they were given the means to do so.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's just
just
better for
agree
everybody.
with that. Actually, I don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, today I don't know how many of you got a chance to see the newspaper. I think maybe it's timing of this podcast. So there was a write up on this whole thing about the self-employed women who are actually building India every day. And there are four buckets of it. Actually, if you see the article, very clearly calls out in terms of some of them in the hardcore, manual labor, which is your agriculture, construction. Some of them as street vendors. Some of them actually having the capacity of some capital, some labor, and ability to market themselves and actually producing certain things. And which is where if you do a further extrapolation of that article, it actually calls out very distinctly that they end up doing a lot of hazardous work while men get the privilege of getting even in examples like Manrega, if you look at the government scheme, they are getting the work which is less of toiling in the sun, and the women are actually there out there in the fields, and they probably are driving the tractors. So somewhere it boils down to, like you said, I think, Anu, in the beginning, in terms of upskilling, and pulling the women to one level up. So if you're at a construction site, can you upgrade yourself and start doing masonry? Are you doing embroidery? Can you be upskilled to get into some quality checks? And what kind of designs can make your stuff more marketable? Can you really come into strong, organizations which take up your cause? Because if 94% of the informal economy is employing women, and somewhere they don't even have a seat at the policy table, I think it's also that, this portion of the country, which is still 60% sitting and 65% sitting in the rural areas, you can't ignore this portion, which is adding to the economy every day. While we have our battles for the next stage of development and growth, people who've crossed education, people who've entered, the corporate sector, that's one part of the battle. But I think this is the input or the base or the foundation of the country, where again, I think it requires a bit of giving them that space on the policy table, and while you do the upskilling in a very orchestrated manner, so that, their social regard for the job which they do itself is not low, and it is by default doesn't come in as less pay, less security, and less value for it.
No, I think this is very interesting, and I think you people are raising very interesting points, which are extending beyond the sort of formal sector and talking about the larger economy and all the people that are part of it. Aarushi alluded to it briefly when she mentioned the concrete roofs that many people have to encounter, not just glass ceilings. Thanks for all that, and a little bit more after we take a short break.
Security on a computer is like a layered cake. No matter how secure each layer may be, attackers and hackers will work tirelessly to find a vulnerability and exploit it. These cyber attacks can sneak into a system unnoticed, eventually gaining access to all the programs and files on your computer stack. Luckily, with Intel Wipro platform, all of this is avoidable. Intel Wipro has the Intel Hardware Shield, which adds protection to every layer of the computer system with 3 groups of security capabilities. Advanced Threat Protection, which helps quickly detect and remediate the latest ransomware and crypto mining attacks on the system. Below the OS Security, which helps identify unauthorized changes to hardware and firmware. And Application and Data Protection, which helps prevent memory corruption and malware injection. So secure your organization's productivity with hardware-based security only with Intel Wipro. Visit intel.in/IT heroes to know more. Intel Wipro, built for business.
Thank you very much. And back to you, Aarushi.
So I think what I was referring to when I spoke about the concrete roof is specifically about, the informal sector, that there are some jobs, especially when you talk about the rural economy, that women get constrained to. This refers to both, being restricted to working within the household, that is, doing domestic chores, or the fact that you're only employed in the household farm, that you're never given the opportunity to really leave the four walls of your household. And that's the concrete truth that you have to live with. And this is despite the fact that we've had government schemes that come in, encourage you to educate your girl child, that there is a higher percentage of girl children who are passing that 10th grade, their 12th grade. But yet we see that they're still constrained to the very same jobs that they were 10 years ago. And I think that does merit a conversation as to what are we doing wrong. That we've noticed that education is supposed to encourage people to enter the economy, but in India, that just doesn't seem to be the case. Anu and Priti, do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
something
Mayur,
that
go ahead.
we don't. Yeah, sorry. I just was saying something we don't recognize often enough is women is not a homogenous group as such, right? Exactly what you were saying, Aarushi, is there is such intersectionality in our identities as well. Whether it be your socioeconomic status, whether it be caste, whether it be gender, sexuality, etc. There's so much that goes on, and very often, exactly as you said, I think we're not looking at those who are most marginalized and seeing how to improve their outcomes as well. And in terms of creating why is this not working? What's going wrong? I have a few ideas where I definitely think that this piece of women being constrained to the farm or allied sectors, etc. That needs to change, but that needs to also change within the social cultural aspects, right? So whether it's upskilling people or it's creating better jobs within the sector itself, which will then incentivize other people to kind of move away potentially. I think there's some stuff that needs to be done in that area, and there's some stuff that needs to be dug into a little bit more. Is that are our socio-cultural norms kind of stopping us and then creating this another ceiling that we need to surpass once we've achieved that education level as well? Priti was saying something good.
Yeah. No, I was asking you to step in and then probably, add to it. So my view is somewhere irrespective of the education and the generations, we've been living through, deep rooted, there is unconscious bias. Somewhere there is this whole unconscious bias people are continuing to live with. And I don't see that going away very soon unless, you have a couple of more, strong actions coming in. Because if we look at the generation before us or the generation prior to us, I don't think they have seen women at their own household stepping out and working. So somewhere you've drawn these invisible boundaries yourself, and it just gets nurtured to the next generation and with some bit of dilution. So today, if I pause and look, I think today in our generation, it has got diluted to some extent, but you still have the strata of the society where this dilution is at various levels, where still you earmark certain things of how you dress, how you walk, what you can study, what stream you can choose, is a lot coming from your upbringing, your deep-rooted, beliefs or the social fabric in which you've been inculcated and, brought up. That, in my view, will take some time more. And some of us will have to make some beginnings in our own families of how you bring up a son and how you bring up a daughter in terms of the differentiation you do, because it starts right there.
Even talking about just I think we're talking about the informal sector and farms and stuff like that, right? In India, I think women do have the right to own land, but I don't know that very many do, right? And whenever they do own it, I don't know if it translates into actual control of the land as well, right? So there is no reason if we upskill this sector, for example, there's no reason that a woman can't, I guess, run a tractor or do stuff like that. But there needs to be agency. They need to have greater control in, and we need to have greater control in what happens in the household sphere and actually translate that outside of as well, right? And some of it could come through policies and law as well, right? In terms of creating more gender equitable laws and creating policies that are gender affirmative, for the lack of a better word.
Gender neutral, actually, to add to it.
Oh my God, I believe that. I believe in that so strongly. It's like, I think creating gender neutral policies is it's hard, but it's much needed. Sometimes there is this, I think gender neutral policies doesn't mean that we lose the protections that we need and deserve. but it also means that you look at all the policies and all the laws of the land and make sure and make sure that we're not being systematically kind of left out of the conversation in any sphere as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that while you were talking about it, it just reminded me of a book that somebody recommended to me earlier this week. And I've started reading. It's called The Invisible Woman, right? So this invisible woman talks about how, especially in this world where data is sort of driving many things, women are pretty much left out of this whole thing. They're not there in the surveys. They're not there in selections, and everything from the height of desks to the temperature set in office rooms to the height of shelves and various things in terms of the fact that there are more women who take public transport compared to men who have like motorcycles and cars and use private transport and so on, and how all the policies and everything are skewed towards men, even in the guise of being gender neutral.
Something that I read about was in Bihar there was a bicycle scheme for women to be able to go to secondary school, and how much that actually impacted enrollment and completion rates positively, simply because they now had agency, right? And they were able to avoid public transport, which is deemed as unsafe, and in my experience, frankly, sometimes can be. And they were able to kind of, get there by themselves. And exactly what you're saying, Sridhar, is that sometimes these policies may appear gender neutral, but they may not be. And that's why we need gender affirmative policies sometimes, which is something as simple as I was listening to you and Aarushi talk about urban areas and then rural areas in one of your podcasts. And I was thinking through, well, if women are going to have to be in rural areas and in the short term, if socio-cultural norms are not going to change and women have to be engaged in households, take the jobs to them. Create more jobs in areas that are semi-urban, right? Create more skilling opportunities in those areas as well. And maybe if things are not working, that's the path we need to take.
Yes, I think I strongly agree with that. Like, as someone who's been reading a lot about, urban policy in general, a lot of it comes down to the policies we make and how we often forget that they come with a certain context. So, we look at policies that were probably created in another country and, they led to a certain increase in, women's labor force participation there. And we try to implement it here without thinking about the context. And that was one of the good things about the Bihar policy that you just spoke about, was that they took into context that there was a certain incentivizing that was required, and that incentivizing and the leakage that was seen with these kind of schemes was that when there was a recurring transfer that had to take place, or you had to stretch it out over a long period of time, there was a lot of leakage. So this policy addressed that by saying that, we're going to give all the bicycles at one shot, and we're going to give this on the basis of the distance from the secondary school you're attending.
Why? I mean, I was thinking of the three of you on this conversation, and I was thinking, here's one person who's sort of been there, done that, gone through this whole issue of building a career in this largely male-dominated world, and trying to make positive impact to getting more women at work, etc. And there's Anu, who's sort of starting off in her career and doing things and navigating her way and finding her way through all this, through the morass. And Aarushi is sitting on the edge and wondering, how is it? I mean, I'm just feeling completely incensed at the whole thought that these things still have to be considered. And I'm not seeing much of your anger here today, Aarushi. Why is that?
I think it's because I would like to believe that whenever I've had the opportunity to actually come and work, whether it's at Takshashila or at another place, I have never, because of the women who've come before me, I have never felt it as much as probably those who have, paved the path for me have. And while this anger does exist, that, probably for someone who doesn't come from the same socioeconomic background that I come from, the path isn't going to be this easy. At some place you still feel gratitude for the fact that it was a little easy for you, and I think all you can do is be thankful for everyone who paved the way for me to come here and not have to fight for my voice to be heard, for me to be able to go into a meeting and have my point of view heard without, a man having to, sort of corroborate my point of view and say that, yeah, that is a good point. Like, it's taken in independence that it is a good point.
Thanks, Aarushi. And let's take a short break. And when we come back from the break, I'd like our panelists to talk about the top ideas for changing this.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.
Yeah, I'd like to use this opportunity to also call for applications to Takshishila's short course on evidence-based policy making for responding to COVID-19. This 4-day course is stretched over 2 weekends and introduces the participants to the various public policy aspects of managing recurring COVID-19 waves. The dates are on the 23rd, 24th, 30th, and 31st of October 2021. The last date to apply will be 17th of October, and students get a special discount on the total fee. Over to you. Priti, you want to start off by talking about, while we agree that women's labor force participation rate is very low, we understand that the care economy that women are unfairly burdened with plays a significant role in keeping women away from work. And what are your top ideas for improving this and getting India to a level where there are at some point as many women at work as there are men, and the unfairness of this all is sort of addressed? Over to you.
Sure. So I'll confine it maybe more on the formal sector before, giving a perspective on the informal. So I think on this side, I would say that we will need to, it's a huge opportunity in the current scenario, if you ask me, to catch the women talent in all the parts of the country wherein we may exist as an organization, and that calls out for any organization for that matter in the new way of working. So it's a huge opportunity of reaching out there to every woman who's educated, who's aspiring and wants to make a career, wants to make a start, to really not get stuck with some of our, metros wherein people traditionally have found a job. So today, I think that's the first step of reaching out where they are and catching them there and enabling them to just start a journey, in your organization, if they have that capability in terms of skills or, even, and today, trust me, campus onboarding is almost 52 or 53% women employees across, whether it's a graduate campus or it's a postgraduate campus. I think we have talent there. And once you catch them today, initially you were confining yourself to some, bigger cities because that's where you operate. Today, you're operating globally, you're operating virtually, you're operating hybrid. So I think the first one is to catch them for whichever city they belong or whichever town they are, as long as they're qualified. Second is pause now and I think review your policies, which I think organizations are starting to do, of ensuring that you meet the needs, changing needs aligned to the changing life stages of women. It can't be that you have one policy which worked and will continue to work. So there is this whole thing of rephrasing or re-articulating your people practices or talent practices for women aligned to the life stages which they go through. Third, I think, most of the organizations have role models. They have role models outside the industry also. So are we able to get some of those storytelling happening and telling them that, taking them along and being their advocates, rooting for them, even in that smaller percentage, investing in them early in their career so that you really don't lose them when they are in that whole iffy state of mind that can I still take it on? I think I need a break. And that's when you need the maximum support, maximum engagement, maximum enablement that, we are with you and you can make it happen. So just don't get off the ship right now. I think if we can crack that today, I see a 15 to 20 percentage point drop at that stage, and then we are not able to catch up and we become a single digit by the time we become, the so-called women leaders in the organization, which run in a single digit from a percentage point. So I'm not letting that thing drop off, I think is another big one for the organization, which we are consciously working on. And I think the last bit I personally feel is, having that whole engagement even at the school level now, when women are being made career choices and going out there and engaging with them, even in the 10th or the 12th, that, there are options and that organizations are willing to partner with you in terms of giving that 10x effect of enabling you to be more employable, to be more ready and having a career of your choice, not something which you are forced to and, you're told you can only do this. So partnering in making their mind, engaging with them, reaching out there when they are still in that stage of, mind formation as to what do I do after 10th, what do I do after 12th? Can we start engaging with them right then there instead of, especially the tier 2, tier 3 cities, because trust me, the genuine talent there is far more sticky in the organization, which is a pattern we are seeing vis-a-vis talent, which sticks on with organizations which comes from a typical metro with no ill feeling towards many of us who come from metro. But I'm just seeing as a pattern to stick on, pattern of that hunger, of that passion to really make something with my life, do something with my career. I think it's like maybe a shade higher out there, and it is in our interest as organization, as a country, to just leverage that pool out there and not lose it somewhere in between, because I think we need to reach out. A lot more reaching out, a lot more engaging, a lot more instilling confidence. I think that whole belief that you can do it, and then leading it by example, because all of it on paper doesn't look good if you don't execute it. And people really see that needle moving right there at the top, and you don't lose talent in the middle of your, of your career journey. That's my perspective from an organization, and not really very equipped and, very qualified to comment on the informal sector. But that's my take from industry perspective.
Thank you very much, Priti. Anu, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there are 4 or 5 main things that I'm taking away from this conversation. A, women need better jobs, and we need jobs that work for us. So today, a lot of the work and a lot of what we discussed is about how there needs to be almost this perfect confluence, right? You can be employed when everything else works out for you, which is that you have the support that you need, you're able to take care of the domestic work that you're doing, etc., etc. And I think that for most women in India today, there is a ping pong that's happening between when they're going into the labor force and coming out, simply because there's not a lot of quality jobs available out there that work in this construct, right? So that's one, is diversification of jobs and creating better opportunities for women. I think 2 is better policies and more equitable laws. So whether women need better childcare policies, I was talking about construction workers in creches, but yeah, I think we need better, we need childcare policies. We need, think of like mandatory childcare or family leave even. So today I know maternal leave is very hotly contested because there also seems to be tax that women pay for taking maternal leaves, where organizations don't tend to employ them as much preemptively, thinking that, hey, this is something that's going to work against us, right? So something that I'm thinking is, why don't we create, level the playing field, create family leave that not only encourages people to help out at home, but also really takes away this burden from women, right? And I think IMF also showed that if there is less legal discrimination against women, there is a higher female labor force participation rate. So what Priti was talking about, gender neutral laws, level the playing field across the board, and also create jobs where women are. So if the socio-economic construct of the country is not going to change overnight, then maybe what we do and our intervention points need to change, right? So instead of expecting women to migrate from rural areas to urban areas, or, expecting them to suddenly create a revolution within their homes and say, hey, this is what we must do, right? Not that I'm against it. I totally would support all women creating revolutions in their homes. But yeah, it's like try and take the jobs where they are, right? Try and take the skill development agencies where they are. Try and give them the skills that are not just women friendly, but also which is what I've seen a lot of, right? but also there's a real demand in the industry for, right? And I think that takes a lot of planning on our end, and making sure that these policies that are being created and the industry as well kind of looks at it from this perspective. And finally say, I think women-led entrepreneurship is something that we've spoken about very briefly, but we must recognize that there are structural challenges, right? So there is a lot of potential, but there is a lot of effort that is needed and a multi-pronged effort that is needed from, say, unblocking things like networking and access to mentorship to equal access to finance. The playing field is not level. And I think for us to unlock all this potential, there needs to be some sort of a multi-pronged effort on looking at what are the systemic barriers that are not allowing women to get into entrepreneurship or scale up as much as they'd like, right? And that can be an entire conversation by itself. And then the last thing, as I always say, is I feel passionately about creating better representation and giving voice to those who have more intersectional identities. I think what Aarushi said is, I recognize the privilege that I have where I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I'm able to do this because people who came before me made it much easier, right? And I think by having more representation, by making sure that we continue to talk about this, even though it's something that is well known, we can do a lot more and make sure that folks who are more marginalized than us get included in the conversation. Kind of elongate the table rather than creating barriers around it. That's my long monologue. Go on,
Thank you, Anu.
And I think to end it, I'll end it with like two ideas that I've spoken at length with Sridhar about. So I think the first thing that I'm really passionate about is, in increasing representation, but specifically in the political sphere, and this goes down to the local self-government that India has as a federal structure, where we do have where the local level is probably more powerful than other levels because of just how much reach it has. When we notice that there is, 33% reservation that occurs at that level, but even the women leaders who take up those positions are often controlled by the men in their houses. I think that needs to change, that, you have women leaders who are truly independent, who take up these positions, who are able to affect change for the people they're representing. And this is not just important to ensure that the people that they're representing are really represented, but also because it has been noted that when women notice and when women see that there are women leaders, political leaders in power, that, they've moved beyond the confines of the household, especially in rural areas, it tends to increase their own employment, their own confidence rather, to move out of the household and pick up jobs. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing would go back to making employment more conducive to women. So we are looking at a lot of women in the informal sector being employed in construction. And I think it's imperative that we raise safety standards, which is something that we've always thought of as something very basic. One reason why women don't often participate in the workforce is simply because of safety concerns. And if you're able to tackle the issues of not just safety at the workplace, but also, safety of getting to the workplace, safety of not just instruments, but also people who are at the workplace, is a very intuitive idea that we've always thought of, but that will increase women's labor force participation, because then your support system would encourage you to go outside of the house because they know that you're going to be safe there. So those are the two ideas that I had.
Hey, thank you very much. I think this has been a very fascinating conversation for me. Sitting and listening to three of you talk about this and debate this at length, and wonderful ideas, all. And this idea of entrepreneurship, the idea of family leave, the idea of getting more care contribution from men, idea of safety to work and back, all brilliant ideas. And I think we should build on them and do more. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast from Delhi Capitals, we have their manager Siddharth Bhasin and marketing head Vaibhav Dar discuss with Varun what Nayi Delhi is all about and the life of players in the bio bubble. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to Masoom Meenawala, luxury fashion influencer, about her focus on wanting to elevate women in business. On Simplified, Chuck, Tony, Naren and Shrikesh are once again joined by Bertie to talk about his love for vinyl records. On Tere Mere Raaste, Keshav takes us to India's biggest man-made lake, Bhopal Tal. And on Smile India, Shifa tells us the story of Monisha from Mumbai, who uses empty Tetra packs to create durable furniture for schools. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our others for that matter, please do tell a friend. We really appreciate you spreading this. Word of mouth helps a lot. And finally, this week, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, and Intel. We really appreciate the support.
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.